Okay, so this week with Live with Patrick and Lyndsey, yes, that is a name in working progress. We're going to talk about Netflix's show Hollywood, which has just taken the world by storm at the moment. It is a show that has so many different storylines running side by side that there is just so much to take away from it. You've got the homosexual side of things, the racism, the corruption, the show marriages that go on, and there's so many amazing characters in it that I actually cannot wait to really get stuck into talking about them. But the first one that I want to talk about is Rock Hudson, because I knew the name and I'd seen some films, but really didn't know an awful lot about him. And watching this show, initially I thought, oh, it's pretty cool to see him and what he might have been like. But in reality, Rock Hudson wasn't even popular in the 40s. He wasn't actually popular until the 50s. So what we were seeing wasn't anything like what he really was. Yes, he was awkward. Yes, he was nervous and probably didn't do as well to start off with, but there was no way he needed, I don't know what it was, like 100 takes of his audition. That was not the case with him. But what was really cool, I loved the fact that with his gay storyline, they did the whole thing where they came out in front of everyone, where in reality it was actually the 80s before Rock Hudson came out, and it was only because he was dying of AIDS that he even came out. So that never happened. You know, he never was an openly gay actor during that time. So I kind of love that it was something that they put in that wasn't really happening, you know. So they kept so much, but they kind of put in a wee bit of fantasy for what they would have liked the time to be.
Yeah, that's interesting. It almost, the TV show, the Hollywood TV show almost showed the 1940s as being a little bit more progressive than it probably was. There probably was gay people around at that time. There probably was some people who were accepting of it. But I would say that probably the vast majority of people in that post-war period were probably homophobic, and that homophobia was probably the norm at that time. And even though there may have been exceptions to that rule, and I'm not saying in any way that there weren't exceptions to that rule, the TV show was it. What I took away from the TV show was that it dealt with political correctness very well. The TV show, it was set in a different time period, so it could show the true nature of political incorrectness by setting itself in that time period, but at the same time, it had our contemporary values. So it did kind of both at the same time. It had the homophobia of that era with the kind of acceptance of our era kind of merged together to kind of show the true tragedy of the homophobia. We talked before about false narratives whenever we were talking about the Tiger King, and how false narratives aren't necessarily bad narratives. And I think that whenever I was watching Hollywood, I was reminded of that this may be not necessarily a false narrative, but certainly a politically correct narrative, and that it was good. It was a good politically correct narrative. It was because it did show us the tragedy of homophobia. And with Rock Hudson's story, there's obviously the whole sexual harassment thing, which is obviously important in this era as well.
Yeah, I mean, definitely it really brought to light just how much those big wigs do dictate what you do for where you're getting to be in the movie industry.
Not just the movie industry, though. In any creative industry where you need an amount of luck to succeed, any creative industry where you are at the beck and call of the bigwigs, the part of the punk rock appeal of indie artists is that they're not dependent on the big wigs to kind of succeed, whereas pop artists kind of are. You know, X Factor is completely dependent on Simon Cowell. But when it comes to Hollywood and being an actor, you have to get in there with the big wigs, with the Harvey Weinsteins essentially. You have to impress them, and that amount of power corrupts always. And I think that's what the Harvey Weinstein thing basically taught all of us, is that whenever you're in that position of power, that it will go to your head. You will become a megalomaniacal person, and it's part of the business. As much as I agree that Rock Hudson is possibly the most interesting story, by way of structure, it might be best to talk about Jack Castello first, and then kind of come into the kind of story in the same way as the audience comes into the story. Because Jack Castello, he was in a relationship, he had a dream, he was handsome, and he sold out. So by way of structure, I think that if we talk about Jack Castello first and then make our way down to come back to talk about Rock Hudson, because I think that's a better way to structure this. And as much as I agree that Rock Hudson has the most interesting story. So yeah, so he was in the war. He married a young girl before he went off to fight in Italy. And obviously he had the hope and the dream of being an actor, went to Hollywood. But he got very, very lucky. Something I pursued a dream of being a rock star for a while. You know, I was in the music industry, and the sheer amount of luck that it takes. Jack was very fortunate. He was handsome. He could act, which was something, but that wasn't enough. He had to meet the right people at the right time, and also completely sell out. You know, he had to basically become a male prostitute. You know, he was at kind of the beck and call of Ernie. You know, so he literally sold his body in order to make the right contacts. And a lot of kids today who want to pursue creative endeavours don't realise the sheer amount of indignity that goes along with the pursuit of a creative career. And that was what Jack's story, and I suppose Rock's story as well, told in a very, very interesting way.
Yeah, I think with Jack's story, the fact that he sort of came along and his friend had been there pounding that ground every single day with everybody else, waiting to get his big break. And yes, he was getting bits and pieces here and there, but it took Jack to meet the right people, as you say. He met Ernie, he went and did his work with Ernie, and then he was with that woman, and it was her that actually brought him in. And had that encounter not happened, he wouldn't have made it big, he wouldn't have progressed so quickly, and potentially may never have got that big break, because he was attractive, just because he could act, he didn't even get a chance to get in the door to show them that he could act. So he just had that pretty face. But it is all about who you know sometimes that really gets you in that door quicker than others.
Also, Ernie's business introduced Jack to the writer of Meg, or Peg. So he got introduced to him through the prostitution ring, through not being willing to have gay sex as part of his job. So so the pure amount of nefariousness that kind of went around there in order that he could meet him. And then he met Ray Ainsley, who was the director, through meeting him. Yeah. And then through that, he had kind of all the contacts necessary in order to get the main part. So that is a lot of luck. That's a lottery win. So it's not just that he had the look, and he did have the look. It's not just that he had the talent, and he did have the talent. Without that lottery win as well, he would not have been anything. Yes, so that lottery win is important.
Yeah, I mean, how often do we say it, that it's not about what you know, it's who you know. And for Jack Castello, that was 100% the truth for him, because he would never have got that part. And it's the same for, Coller's daughter, who was initially cast for that role.
Claire.
He went, no, it's not for me. You know, she was only getting that role because it was her daughter. So again, there's the whole, it's not what you know, it's who you know. It is that luck of who you're surrounded with.
So Claire had an interesting story, sure. Camille Washington is probably the most beautiful girl I've ever seen in my life. So her acting ability, I think she won that Oscar or whatever. She was gorgeous, but at the wrong time, at the wrong place in the wrong time, basically. She was not getting roles because of her race, which is probably a true reflection of that time period. That time period was the Jim Crow time period. It was the civil rights movement didn't start until the 1960s. That she was even in that position where she was potentially getting roles was probably inaccurate for an African-American woman at that time period.
She was closer to getting to the roles than a lot of African-American people would have actually been. Anyone of colour would not have been that close. And I know her initial roles were all just maids and domestic help and stuff, but I still think around that time, it would have been more white people that still would have been getting those roles. You know, we're probably not far away from the time where people were still doing the blackface to try and be a person of colour in movies.
Well, they did mention Song of the South, which was out in around that time period. Song of the South is probably the most racist movie that has ever being made. It's about a slave on a plantation who's really happy being a slave. It's a Disney movie, and he's sort of completely subservient to his white masters, and the happiest slave that could ever be happy is basically Song of the South. That wasn't the worst thing that would have been happening at that time. The Ku Klux Klan would have been very, very active at that time, and lynchings would have been very common.
Yeah.
It does. What I said before there about it painting a slightly more politically correct narrative of that time period is probably true. What I found interesting about Camille Washington is that whenever she played the maid, they kind of made her the comedic relief, kind of like she was a bit dumb, a bit stupid, a bit kind of, that she wasn't to be taken seriously even in a serious movie, and that was very much how kind of ethnic people would have been treated at that time, as if sort of they were dumber than white people, as if they were kind of, and at that time that is absolutely accurate, and it shows the true tragedy of racism, really. That my thoughts on race, I know that we grew up in Northern Ireland, and I grew up during the 1980s in Northern Ireland, and as a people in the 1980s and early 1990s in Northern Ireland, we were quite ignorant. We were not very worldly because of our problems here. I remember that racial slurs on the playground were pretty common. There weren't an awful lot of people of colour around. There weren't an awful lot of people who weren't from Northern Ireland around. We had next to no exposure of other ethnicities, and that has changed quite a lot, I suppose, over the last 10 years in Northern Ireland, but that is very, very recent. I think that contemporary political correctness are obviously better, but it rings home to me because I remember that those sort of words were flying around the playground as if they didn't mean anything, incendiary language about people that weren't there. The people, like, anyone ethnic wasn't on the playground, so there wasn't anybody to call us up on it. Asia seemed very far away. Africa seemed very far away. For the most part, Northern Irish people didn't travel that much during the Troubles because most people couldn't afford to. During the Troubles, there was a 40% unemployment rate in Northern Ireland. Today, it's 5%. So a lot of people in Northern Ireland were unemployed. A lot of people weren't travelling. Nobody particularly was coming to us from anywhere in Asia or Africa So we were an ignorant people unintentionally. We just didn't have the exposure to other ethnicities, and that would have been the 1940s back then, that there would have been that kind of ignorance and intolerance towards other ethnicities.
Yeah. What I like about what they did with this, though, is rather than just showing how awful it was, yes, they showed how hard it was for somebody to get a role, and they did show part of people protesting, and we had the crosses being burned in the garden, but you didn't see the real darkness of it, and we also didn't see the side of it where, for the most part, those actresses and actors would have just stepped back and went, okay, do you know what, this isn't worth it. I need to just shy away from this. Whereas what we saw was two different actresses who fought for their rights, who showed us this is what we should be doing. And it kind of rings true for every different minority, race, sexual gender, whatever you are. It kind of rings true for all of that rather than just shying away from it, we should be breaking down those barriers. And I love that rather than just showing exactly what it was like in the 1940s, they showed us a wee bit more what a bit more progressive time could have been.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting point. It's almost what we could have been as opposed to what we were, which kind of made me feel a sense of guilt for that time period, and not just because, as I say, in the 1980s, I as a child, and probably most people my age as a child, were not as tolerant as we should have been. And as I've become more tolerant and accepting as I've grown older, and I hope that I have, I feel as if I have, just through exposure, through meeting other people and talking to them, and understanding more about their cultures and understanding that people of other ethnicities have all the same challenges we have, basically, and through exposure we do become more tolerant. And Queen Latifah's character was Hayley McDaniel, is what you called her. Their bond, their kind of sisterness was nice. It's I don't want to call it like a bromance. I don't know what the feminine equivalent of a bromance is, but their kinship brought something nice to the show.
Mm-hmm.
Queen Latifah wasn't in it much, but I know her from Chicago, and she was very good in Chicago, and the struggles in even getting the movie made. We're going to go kind of back here and talk about Raymond Ainsley, who was the director, and the writer was Archie Coleman was the writer. So their struggles and their vision for the show, probably Ray's contact with Camille was kind of the final straw in getting her the role. Their relationship and their tie and his pressure, but that the movie almost didn't even get made because Archie was African American. Even writers struggled with racism at that time. There's a great Star Trek episode which you should watch called From Beyond the Stars. It's a Deep Space Nine episode, and it's basically a similar story. It's kind of a bottle episode, so you don't really need to be into Deep Space Nine to watch it. But it's actually tells a very similar story. Captain Sisko was African. His race was never really mentioned throughout the run of Deep Space Nine. It wasn't talked about at all. It was just accepted. Nobody talked about his race, and that's the way it should be. Except in this one episode called From Beyond the Stars, where he was a writer and he wrote about Deep Space Nine. And he told the story of Deep Space Nine, and it was a sci-fi story, and it was set in that time period. It was set in the 1940s, and basically he faced all the same struggles that Archie faced. They wanted to take his name off it and have a white writer be a show writer. They wanted to destroy Deep Space Nine essentially and kind of make it more white. They wanted to cast Captain Sisko as a white man and not a black man. It's a phenomenal episode of Deep Space Nine. If you don't watch any other episode of Deep Space Nine, that's fine. You either like sci-fi or you don't. But this isn't really a sci-fi episode, and what's fantastic about sci-fi generally is that they can do these little bottle episodes, and it just brings out a different side of the character. Bringing this back to Archie, basically he faced a lot of the same problems as Ben did in that episode of Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
Was Archie gay?
Yeah, I think the guy Ray, who was
the
director,
yeah.
Director, that's what he was. Well, he was half Filipino, so even his whole family was from a minority as well. So I mean, you had different races included there, which I thought was really good. You know, it wasn't just sticking to the one. Not that I'm belittling any race of any kind, but I thought it was good to widen that a wee bit.
Yeah, certainly Ray didn't look Asian in any way. Yeah, because he was half white, and the conversation that he had with Archie about, oh, well, I'm half Filipino, and Archie was like, you don't look Filipino, you look white. You know what I mean? Like, so I don't know if he necessarily had any struggles because of his race, because he was able to kind of...
No, but he did then get discriminated because he didn't look what he actually was. You know, people assumed that he didn't know what it was like. So say his Filipino family, he would know what it's like for them. So he would have had some of the issues because clearly one of his parents is Filipino, so he would be having issues with that one parent. So we'd understand a lot of what's going on rather than just being totally white and not having a clue.
I think Archie's story is a little bit more interesting than Ray's story. I think Ray did it Ray obviously was the director. He was a main character, I suppose. His story was interesting enough. Actually, everyone's story was really interesting, or at least the 8 or 9 main characters, and there's about 6 or 7 periphery characters. All of the characters had an interesting story set in that backdrop, but Archie, with his race, and with whenever Dick Samuels met up with him in the meeting room, he was the CEO person, or the CEO of Ace Studios, and not Dick Samuels, I'm not sure. Anyway, he walked straight out of the room whenever he saw he was black, and then there was obviously the struggles just even to get it made in the first place. And
yeah, because he walked into the room and saw the black actress, the black writer, and was like, what the heck is going on here? And immediately wanted to shut it all down. But I thought it was a really good thing that we had then the fight for it, and to see people fighting for that. I thought that, again, it goes with the whole showing a more progressive time.
Yeah, I don't know to what extent. I mean, I've said before, I'm not sure to what extent that would have been a true reflection of that time, but it, by way of good art, and it was good art, it did show a good guise of kind of showing us the true reflection of sexism, racism and homophobia, and that was really did that very well. Archie in a relationship with Rock Hudson, isn't that? Is this our good segue into talking about Archie and Rock? So they were a loving couple. Archie met Rock, or was it Archie, whatever, through the drive-in.
Yeah, from the wash he had popped in as that wee shy person just coming along, and we didn't really obviously know who he was going to be at the start. But yeah, I think it was interesting because, again, it probably gives you an insight of that may have been what Rock Hudson himself had to do back at that time, is sort of slink about in the darkness and try and get some sort of affection. Again, the fact that they became a couple is going with the whole fantasy of the whole thing. Every storyline kind of goes off on a way where, again, it is trying to be more progressive and more enjoyable and really just fantasy in the end. But we do get that sort of introduction into what life might have been like for them, but they give us a better version of it than reality.
I think it's worth taking a few minutes here now to talk about teenagers and coming out of the closet, and the way in which they were meeting secretly, and how Rock Hudson and Archie, they didn't want to call themselves a couple for a long time, and how Archie didn't want to commit to him or even admit necessarily that he was gay. There was a wee bit of certainly in 1980s, people coming out of the closet was a big thing. I mean, even recently, Philip Schofield came out of the closet and the media made a big circus out of it. Coming out of the closet like that is a big thing, and it's a big pressure for people. Teenagers, certainly 20 years ago, probably less so today, to give ourselves some credit about tolerance today. I do think that we do have to give ourselves some credit, that we are more accepting today. But back then, people would not have been accepting of that. Even in the 1980s, Freddie Mercury and Elton John, George Michael, would have had a lot of problems. Freddie Mercury was often asked about his sexuality and lied about it. Or not lied about it, but did you watch the Freddie Mercury biopic? So he tried to evade questions about his sexuality. He was very much in love with his female friend, but he evaded questions about his sexuality. Even then, even in the 1980s, you would think would have been a bit more progressive than the 1940s. Or so, just to realise how taboo homosexuality would have been in the 1940s. They were ready to make that movie with the Afro-Caribbean lead, and they were ready to break down that wall. But breaking down the wall of homosexuality would not have happened until the 1980s. And whenever
I think back then in the 1940s, it was actually illegal.
Yes, it was. What do you call him? The guy who did Enigma. He was arrested. He was arrested for being gay and imprisoned for being gay. I also watched that movie. That was a very good movie with Benedict Cumberbatch. And he was, in the 1950s, he was arrested in the UK for being gay and spent 4 years in prison for being gay. And they wanted to sterilise him, and they may or may not have sterilised him.
Yeah, I would say there were probably a lot of people that were.
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure that guy who worked on the Enigma machine was sterilised, and then he died young, or he committed suicide or something in the 1960s. So he had a tragic story which wasn't fully told in that movie. It was alluded to, but it wasn't fully told, because that whole thing didn't really happen until way after World War II, like 1950s, 1960s. But he was one of the greatest minds probably ever. And because he was gay, he just never got to kind of be the great mind that he should have been. But we've come sidetracked a little.
That happened so many times with people because of their sexual orientation or their race or whatever. They didn't get the opportunities that they really should have.
Rock Hudson and Jim Parsons' character, Jim Parsons was brilliant in this, and Jim Parsons, such a refreshing change from The Big Bang Theory for Jim Parsons. Jim Parsons has found his in this. Jim Parsons is a much better actor than he was on The Big Bang Theory. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I love Jim Parsons, and I love him in anything I've seen him in. I think he's brilliant. He's brilliant in interviews. He is such a really cool guy to even listen to talking. But the way he portrayed this character absolutely blew me away, because honestly, whenever I was watching him, I didn't see Sheldon. I didn't see any of the other characters I didn't see Sheldon. I didn't see any of the other characters that I've seen. I saw Henry Wilson. I saw exactly what he was portraying. This enigma of a man, this real twisted person who just, it was mad. Like, from the second he was on that screen with this slick back hair, I just thought, I don't like him. I don't like his personality. I don't like the way he carries himself. I don't like how he speaks to people. And I loved how he did that. It was brilliant.
Yes. Jim Parsons is whenever we have to kind of somehow talk about Harvey Weinstein. So Henry and Rock and the sexual harassment there that was happening between those two was obviously not acceptable. And the whole Me Too era is something that we talked about last week a wee bit. And this is the right way to talk about those issues. Firstly, it dealt with two men, which I think that if it had have been a man and a woman sexual harassment, it might have been a bit on the nose, is my opinion. But because it was two men, it allowed us kind of a platform to come into that world and to see corruption of it all and to see the injustice of it all and to see... Now, I mean, obviously, sexual harassment towards women is terrible, and I'm not belittling sexual harassment towards women in any way. But because it was two men and not two women, it wasn't woke. It was dealing with an issue. And this was potentially a very kind of woke show, but it wasn't a woke show. It had something important to say, and it said it well. There are a lot of movies and TV shows that are trying to say the same thing, but aren't saying it well, are sort of saying it in a kind of very preachy way, and are saying it in a very lecturing us on these things, whereas this didn't. It showed us, it didn't tell us. It allowed us to make up our own minds. It just sort of showed us the characters as they were, and it allowed us just to make up our own minds. And obviously, this is completely wrong. It's completely unacceptable. This should not happen, and people who do that should be held to account, is everybody's opinion, I'm pretty sure. But that this show didn't force that down our throats and just showed it. And it was probably a true reflection of the corruption in Hollywood at that time as well. So it was easy to believe. You know, it wasn't like it didn't have to take a leap of logic to kind of go there. You could completely believe that somebody like that was around in the 1940s in Hollywood.
Yeah, definitely, I would agree. I mean, we just kind of followed along with the story. It wasn't like, oh, here we go again, somebody's given us a fake idea of what this is like. But it kind of brought together the homosexuality that people were afraid of sharing, and also how you were forced into doing things if you really wanted to make it at all. And he did just walk into that room and go, right, well, I need to do this. This is just my thing. And if you want to work with me, then you're going to do this. But I love the fact that they twisted it, and it became, no, I'm not doing this. You know, you really hurt me. This shouldn't be happening. This isn't right. And we saw that total change at the end where, you know, Henry Wilson saw where he had gone wrong and wanted to make up for that. Obviously, I don't think that that's going to happen to a lot of the people in this world who have done that and will continue to do it. But I thought it was a really good thing to actually see the humanity of someone as well, realising how horrendous they are and something that they have to live with for the rest of their life.
Yeah. Jim Parsons was amazing in this. I was completely drawn to him. I mean, all the characters were amazing, but particularly Jim Parsons really stole the show for me. The show marriages, yes, there was kind of, with the homosexuality, we'll kind of move on to kind of show marriages, because that would have been very common in the 1940s. And I think that we can still see some marriages today where probably whenever they got married in the 1980s or 1970s, one or other couple may or may not have been gay, but they got married just because they do have affection for each other. This is something that people still do today, is have show marriages if one of them are homosexual and the other one isn't. And they pretty much just cheat on each other, but they do love each other. And this is something that, I can't remember the name of the character now, but this is probably something that did happen even in the 1970s and 1980s, is that, you know, gay people had show marriages. You know, so they found a friend, they got married, they just said, oh, well, we can't have kids or whatever, and to the world they were a happy couple, but behind closed doors they did practice whatever sexuality they had. An interesting point that I heard about the Spartans is that for the Spartans, homosexuality was a rite of passage. Paedophilia was also very common in Sparta. So 300, the movie 300 about the Spartan boys becoming Spartan warriors. It would have been in fact, there was a rite of passage for a Spartan man to mate with a Spartan boy. And that was kind of how ruthless their culture was. So same-sex stuff has been around, since Sparta. But, it's been around probably...
It's been around,
yes.
If we go right back to reading in the Bible. But just talking about the show marriages, I mean, even now, let's even just think of one of the most recent things that we've had is the Philip Schofield thing. Well, he's been married, has children. And John, there's so many people. George Michael has been in straight relationships, but actually was gay. Ricky Martin was with so many people. We had Michael Barrymore.
Okay, yeah.
He married and was gay. Is gay. Is he dead? Why do I feel like he's dead?
I think he died a couple of years ago. I think.
Didn't he? So we have had so many people who have come out, and actually I was looking at the whole homosexual thing and people who there was whispers about, and a few of the people that come up for me, one of them, Richard Pryor, apparently had a couple of gay relationships while he was married.
Okay.
He's the black comedian.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
Marlon Brando, James Dean, Joan Crawford, and Marilyn Monroe apparently was well known in Hollywood that they were together for a while.
Marilyn Monroe and James Dean don't surprise me.
No, but going through, these are all people: Marilyn Monroe, Katharine Hepburn, Greta Garbo, Clark Gable, Cary Grant, Joan Crawford, James Dean, Marlon Brando. All of those people, they were all in that sort of Hollywood thing where they had show marriages. They were with, well, obviously Marilyn Monroe, I mean, she just did whatever she wanted, but these people were with other people but actually had homosexual relationships as well. He was married and then came out after that, so it does still happen. But so it doesn't surprise me then watching back all of those things and actually seeing that side of it. But then again, even in that, we had the owners of Ace who were having sex with other people, not even going into the gay sex stuff, but they were just having affairs all over the place. Sure, he had that heart attack while he was with another woman who, his wife knew really well, and was just normal for them to just be off. Like, she was obviously off with Ernie's boys all the time, and it was just the done thing that they just did their own thing, but they were still married. And even near the end, before he died in the series, they had that really lovely moment where they remembered why they get married in the first place and how much love they actually had for each other. But it is that thing where whenever you are young and you get with somebody and you have that affection for them, you do change over time. So it could be for a lot of people that as they grow in whatever they're doing, that love just isn't there. But a lot of the time still people don't want to walk away from a relationship that isn't right.
There's two things there that I want to kind of talk about. Marriage is very difficult, and I'm not married, you are. Maybe you can speak with more authority on this than I can, but relationships, a lot of people today, whenever the other partner cheats, they kind of think, oh, well, that's a deal breaker, we're going to break up the marriage, we're going to do whatever else. But a lot of people don't. A lot of people kind of, know that the other person's cheating but stay married and still have a constructive relationship. It's just that the sexual energy between the two of them kind of wanes over time. And without wanting to say that sometimes infidelity can be good for marriage, sometimes some married people are quite accepting of the fact that their partner is cheating on them. It's easier for us to stay married than it is for us to get divorced. And we still love each other even though we're not having sex with each other. So all the other love, all the other affection, all the other, except for the sexual stuff, is still there. I think is part of the difficulty of some marriages, not all marriages, and I don't want to sound like I'm encouraging that in any way, but that is one point. The other point, because marriage as an institution is a good thing, and having someone, a companion, even just a friend, is a good thing. So forgiving your spouse, and hopefully not, if that's what it takes to make your marriage work, then it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody's marriage is different, and it's hard to talk about other people's marriages because you don't know what it's like on the inside. And as long as both participating people are willing to do that. I know I was watching a thing recently actually on YouTube, and it was talking about open marriages, and one of them that keeps popping up in these type videos and chats is about Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith. She said, you know, he's a man, he has urges, I'm not going to stand in his way. We do our own thing, but we come home to each other at the end of the day. We love each other very much, and that's just how we do it. And, you know, all these years later, it seems to be working for them. I was also quite fascinated to see that Brian Austin Green and Megan Fox also have an open relationship, but only she is actually allowed to sleep with other people, which I find very interesting. I'm not sure how that one would work. I think it would either be both or none.
Yeah, I think so. I think it would either be both or none.
Standard there, in my opinion. I definitely think it would be really hard for you to be the person sitting at home knowing that your spouse or partner is off out with someone else, and you can't do that. You just kind of have to wait on them coming home knowing that they've been with someone else.
Publicise it. I definitely wouldn't want other people to know that I was in an open marriage. My thing there would be, if I was in an open marriage, I definitely wouldn't. If that is what works for me, and that is what works for my wife, and that's what works for my girlfriend, yes, that works for us. But I definitely wouldn't publicise that in any way, because people will instantly call you bad names, basically. They will instantly say, sort of, from my perspective, I think that people would think less of me if they knew that about me. Although, if that is what it takes to make a marriage work, it's not that I'm intolerant of that, it's just that you don't necessarily it's not anyone else's business but yours. That is... Yeah. That would be my advice to people.
Your marriage could be a very private thing no matter what. I mean, I keep everything about my marriage as private as I possibly can. I mean, if you watch my YouTube videos, you'll see a lot about me personally, but never really anything about my marriage and what goes on between Thomas and I, because that is my personal life and that is between us. And if we had an open marriage, which, you know, we don't, I wouldn't be publicising it. I wouldn't be telling anyone. I don't even think I would tell Lynn.
Yeah. It's none of her business, and it's none of anybody's business. You know, so as much as that may be what it takes to make a marriage work, I kind of do think, you know, a little bit less of those people, and for some reason more the men than the woman. Like if your wife is going out cheating on you, I think, you know, my instinctive position is you're not man enough to keep a woman. But maybe that's me being a misogynist, I don't know, but that's my instinctive reaction. And if I wouldn't want other men thinking that about me and stuff. So if you're in an open marriage, you're in an open marriage, and if you want to experiment, you want to experiment. But it's nobody else's business but yours. Yeah.
No, it's not. What you do behind closed doors should stay behind closed doors no matter what.
100%.
It's your life. You do you. If it works for you, it works for you. But yeah, I mean, with the whole Hollywood thing, I mean, there's so many relationships where they're together just because it works, and they're like power couples a lot of the time, and together they can take Hollywood or whatever industry they're in by storm. But
I think that Hollywood, the TV show, kind of showed this a little bit with Claire and Jack at the end of the show, and how their careers kind of enhanced by going out with each other. High-profile relationships are great for business, but high-profile divorces are probably better for profile in this contemporary era of the newspapers love high-profile divorces, and
Divorce wasn't done back then. You wouldn't have been able to really get divorced back then. You had to just stay with each other as well, because it would have been so taboo. It would have been such a big deal to walk away from that as well. You kind of had to suck it up.
Yeah. This is a sort of a semi-interesting point. There's a statistic that something like 50% of marriages end in divorce today, and with the media kind of sensationalising every high-profile divorce that goes on, and almost celebrities being rewarded for high-profile divorces, there is less incentive in society today to kind of sensationalise the institution of marriage, and more kind of sensationalisation of kind of all the many reasons why you might get divorced from somebody. It's something that, I mean, I'm saying this as a single man. I'm 38 years old and I'm single and I've never been married. I have been engaged, but so maybe I'm not the right person to talk about this. But certainly the kind of what's the media, the celebrity media, over sensationalizes divorce and if this power couple get together for a month and then they break up, they're in the papers for 3-4 years afterwards, and their profile is massively jacked.
How long we had to see different things about Brad and Angelina not Angelina, but Brad and Jennifer for so long after they were married. It was still, this was the worst breakup in Hollywood and blah de blah. When in reality, they weren't actually together that long.
They were together for 2 or 3 months or something. Yeah.
They weren't together that long. They got married. I don't think it really lasted a couple of years at most.
Yeah.
Their marriage, I can't actually remember how long, but in actual fact, he was with Angelina a hell of a lot more. But yet, she was still just classed as the other woman. And when there was those whispers of Brad and Jennifer getting back together, it was like freaking Romeo and Juliet all over again. And you're like, why? Why are we applauding this? Why are we thinking that this is great? That this long lost love is finally getting back together? When he made a dick out of her. They were married. He was with someone else while they were married and then moved on and had the family that he always wanted, and now he's coming back after that.
Yeah.
Whatever. It's not a huge deal. Go on, move on. There's been so many of them. I remember having messages from people going, "Oh my goodness, can you believe Channing Tatum and Jenna Dewan have split up?" And I'm like,
I don't even know who Jenna Dewan is. See, I don't
Channing
really follow. Who is she?
She was Channing Tatum's ex-wife. Okay. That's the height of who she is.
Yeah.
She was a dancer. They met during a film years ago. But it's one of those things that they do. They really sensationalize relationships and the divorce, and it's nearly like the divorce is better. It's more delicious because there's scandal nearly always involved. Yeah, there's Lynn saying they were actually married for 5 years.
Were they? God, that's a lot longer than I thought.
But then you look at how long he was actually with Angelina for. It was at least double that. And they always said they would never get married because it would ruin it. And then the kids talked them into getting married, and a year later they were separated.
Yeah. The last character that I think I want to talk to when it comes to Hollywood is May Wong.
Mm-hmm.
I think that she deserves a 5-minute conversation here before we finish this thing. Chinese, the cultural values of that time. The Japanese were the enemy during World War II, from an American perspective anyway. So a lot of people at that time would not have been able to know the difference between Japanese and Chinese. What you have to realise about is that Asia was so far away and so hard to get to for most ordinary people that Asians in the 1940s, I don't know if it's racist me saying this, but they looked weird. You know what I mean? They had this very alien culture, and they had only just been the enemy. The Japanese anyway had only just been the enemy. The Chinese seemed like a totally different culture. May Wong was portrayed in the show as being a phenomenal actress. She won the Oscar. And I don't know what my point is there, except that I think that that's worth talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was good that they added her in sort of as a sideline, sort of to bring together, as you say, something that really probably wouldn't have been done back then. But it was kind of nice to see another race added in there to break down that racism wall.
It was interesting to see her character development from down and out, alcoholic, jaded, completely just thankful to be given the opportunity, to triumphant, giving a wonderful speech at the end of the whole thing about inclusivity and everything else. And
I think obviously her original storyline was she didn't get the role that she should have got. And again, it goes with the whole white people got everything, and every other race was sort of pushed to the sidelines.
She raised an interesting point about Asians being given very stereotypical roles, very kind of erotic temptresses. Whenever she got her Oscar, she said, "I'm really glad to get this Oscar not for playing an Asian woman, but for playing a woman." That would have been very much the cultural stereotype back then, though, would have been that these Asian women were just these exotic seductresses, and it probably still is today. I mean, whenever you think of Filipino ladyboys Bangkok, or there are a lot of men that have a fetish for Asian women, probably understandably so, because Asian women are, I think Asian women are very attractive, but that was the cultural stereotype of Asian women back then, and that would have been the roles that would have been around. To see this show break that role and to show, not tell, which is basically the core fundamental thing of storytelling, is that it allowed us to kind of to see that. Because she was such a nice, well-rounded human being and obviously a phenomenal actress. So her story interwoven into the rest of the story. There's another interesting point. Do you want to talk any more about May Wong, or do you want to move on? There's an interesting point about women and being CEOs of the organisation, which might be an interesting 5-minute conversation. Because I can't remember the name of that character. I'll put it down here at the bottom. The wife.
My brain. The wife of their couple, he's gone and she has to go into that role. She has to do it. And she bloody did a good job. But as soon as he came back, it was like, bye-bye.
Yeah,
I'm taking over it. And everything she did, he was trying to break down. And that was the thing. Like, there was people kind of looking at her going, you really can't do this. You need a man here. And in actual fact, women and men work really well alongside each other, and more women actually do better jobs than some men. It's an individual thing. It's not about being a man or being a woman. We all have our strengths, and some people would be really good in a CE role, and she did a bloody damn good job and deserved her role in it. And I love that she then did get to live with that and actually do that in the end. But yeah, it's an amazing thing whenever you look at the whole women can't be in power, women can't do this.
Yeah, well, I mean, at that time, the 1940s was still reasonably backward for women, especially African women. Camille Washington was obviously an African woman, but even white women were finding it difficult enough in the 1940s. They had only just gotten the right to vote, I think, in 1930 something, in the USA. That was 1918 in the UK, as far as I know, but it was 1933, I think it was, in the USA. Somebody will correct me on that in the comments, I'm sure. Yeah, so owning land in the US, that didn't happen until the 1970s. It was 1973, I think it was, in the US. It would have been very uncommon for women to be up in high-level positions at that time. Even at that time, it would have been reasonably common for men to play female roles.
Yeah.
In Hollywood.
Yeah, definitely. Even back then, yeah, you would have still found. I mean, even going back a couple of 100 years, I can still think of some of the Shakespeare things where it was all the plays were all men, no matter what it was. Men did everything. So, I mean, you can see how much we have advanced over the years, over hundreds of years. But I think this last 100 years, especially, we have progressed dramatically, and obviously for the better for the most part.
Even over the last 50 years, or the last 30 years.
I was going to say, I think most of that has actually been in less than 50 years, really, the amount that we have advanced. But it is kind of good to see a glimpse into that, and what it would have been like in the 40s.
The thing is about this, I think that was the message of this show, was that look at how much we've advanced over the last 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. This was not a woke show, although it did, it wasn't telling us that we have all this stuff more to do. Almost the message of the show was, look at how far we've come, and yes, there might be little things that we have to sort out here and there and stuff, but today, for the most part, there isn't the same amount of discrimination against women, although Harvey Weinstein's an asshole. Today there isn't, the same amount of discrimination against, ethnic people.
I think we are standing up to it more, and I think that's what the important thing is, people fighting back against it, and that's what will help stop it over time, and I think that's what this show actually has shown as well. We did see people fight back against it.
Yeah.
With the race, with the sexual assault and harassment and all of that, we did see it in a light of, this is what we should be doing. This is how it should have been. It wasn't because it was a different time, but it kind of showed us what could happen if people fought back.
Yeah. It was a wonderful show. I think that we'll kind of sum up here and just say that this is a wonderful, wonderful show. We've kind of ruined the hell out of it for if you haven't seen the show and you've actually watched this live stream, then we've ruined it.
You're not going to watch. You're not going to watch it if you haven't seen the show.
Yes, it was a wonderful show. It was so nice to kind of just be shown the challenges and show how far we have come along. And as much as we all want a more tolerant society, there's no denying that. It's nice to see how far we've come and sort of what challenges still face us, because Henry Wilson and the Harvey Weinstein thing obviously hit very close to home. This was a fantastic show, and I would obviously highly recommend that people watch this.
Everybody should watch it. I've told so many people about it. Go and watch it if you're looking for something on Netflix to watch. And if you've watched this live stream this far and haven't watched it, sorry.
We've ruined it. Yes. But I think that's pretty much us. I think we should pretty much just wrap up there. Yeah, you happy enough?
Yeah. Lynn has chirped in to let us know that in actual fact it was 1920 that American women got the right to vote.
There you go.
1920. So there you go. And also it was me that told her to watch it. So there you go. My influence has gone somewhere.
Awesome.
But yeah, so thank you so much for tonight. It has been really enjoyable. I look forward to our chat next week again. And thank you everybody who has tuned in, and join us again. Who knows, next week we might have a different name. You never know. Anyway, thank you guys. Bye.